Welcome back to part 4 in this multi-part series looking at Canon's Custom Picture system in depth. Now, if you're new to the series, the Custom Picture system is Canon's professional-grade image adjustment and control functionality that's built into their Cinema EOS cameras, professional video cameras, and now the EOS R5 Mark II and R1. Now, in previous videos, I covered how to navigate the Custom Picture system's menus and the available gamma curves and color spaces. This time around, we are going to start digging into the detailed adjustments that the system offers. Beyond the gamma curve, color space, and color matrix settings, the Custom Picture system provides 12 image adjustments that comprise more than 50 individual settings. However, not all of these settings are available with every gamma curve, and for this series, I have split these adjustments into 2 categories: those that are always available or general, and those that are specific to certain gamma curves. Now, in this video, we are going to look at the 6 adjustments that are always available. These are low-key saturation, sharpness, noise reduction, skin detail, color matrix tuning, white balance, and color correction. Now, in this video, I am using an EOS R5C for all the testing and demonstration. However, all of the settings that I'm showing are also available on the R5 Mark II, the R1, and the rest of Canon's Cinema EOS cameras, at least the current models. Now, that said, there is one notable difference to be aware of. On the R5 Mark II and R1, the user interface is different in how the camera handles disabled settings compared to the Cinema EOS cameras. On Cinema EOS cameras, the top-level menu, for example, the black menu entry, will always be enabled, even if the adjustments aren't. On the hybrid cameras, such as the R5 Mark II and R1, the top-level menu is disabled instead of disabling the individual adjustments under it. Now, additionally, I should point out that when shooting raw video, these settings only affect the way the image is displayed on the camera, basically when you're recording the video, but not the actual data that is in the raw video files themselves, or what is played back on the camera when you play back raw video. Moreover, as I said, none of these settings actually affect the raw video, or affect the raw development process, either in software like, for example, DaVinci Resolve or Canon's Cinema Raw Converter. Now, finally, as I've said repeatedly in this series, many of these adjustments are quite technical in nature. I have tried in this video and the subsequent one on the other settings to strike a balance between explaining the technical details and a practical approach to using these settings. Although, as with all kind of technical things like that, making it perfect for everybody is, well, not a realistic objective. So some of this is maybe going to be more complicated or over your head, and some of this may be under your level of understanding depending on where you stand. So, with all of that said, let's start looking at these settings. Now, the first of these universal or general adjustments in menu order is low-key saturation. And low-key saturation controls the color saturation in the darkest area of the image without affecting the color saturation in the highlights, or at least affecting it as much. Now, unsurprisingly, Canon provides very little information beyond what I just said in the manual. They don't tell you anything about what the cutoff level is or how the camera transitions from the low-key range or low-key saturation range into midtones or highlights or anything else. Entering the low-key saturation menu, you will find 2 settings: Activate and Level. Activate toggles the low-key saturation on or off. By default, this is set to off, and when you enable it, the level setting will then control the amount of saturation that's applied. The level setting ranges from -50 to 50, +50, with a default of 0. At 0 saturation, the image's saturation is unchanged in this range. Negative values, of course, desaturate the image, while positive values increase the saturation. Now, in my testing, I found that this seems to have a graduated transition, meaning that it still affects colors above what I would consider the shadows, but increasingly less so until it no longer applies. In this demonstration, on the left is the low-key saturation setting set to off, and on the right it is set to enabled and plus 50. Now, this is of course an extreme amount of saturation, but the point here is to make it clear how to see how the adjustment is going to affect the image at different exposure levels. Now, all that said, low-key saturation is there to boost or reduce the saturation where it's normally or naturally compromised due to the reduction in brightness. However, the range, at least when used with a log3 gamma curve, does extend into what I would consider the midtones, so it doesn't solely affect only the shadow areas. Now, of course, having looked at all of this, the question then is, when should you use low-key saturation and how? The simple answer is that you probably don't need to use it at all, especially if you are grading your video in post. However, if you are in a live broadcast type situation where color grading after the fact is not happening, then you could find that using the low-key saturation to punch up or tone down the saturation in dark areas is useful. Next, moving along in menu order, is the sharpness setting. And as its name implies, sharpness controls the in-camera sharpening capabilities. There are 4 specific adjustments that control how the camera's sharpening is working. These are level, detail frequency, coring level, and limit. Level is the master control. It has a range from -10 to +50 with a default of 0. Increasing the level increases the sharpening. That said, it's not clear to me whether 0 here means that no sharpening is being applied to the image and negative values are softening the image, or if 0 is some minimal safe level of sharpening that Canon has determined is where the camera should be, and the negative values get you closer to a true 0 sharpening. Now, the 3 other settings that are in the menu tune how the sharpening function affects the image. Combined, these allow you to control how the sharpening affects fine details and noise, as well as overshoot and halos. According to the manual, detail frequency controls the center frequency for the sharpening algorithm, and that increasing this increases the amount of sharpening. The range for this setting is ±8 with a default of 0. The question then is, what does that actually mean? And the answer is if you look at 100% magnification, increasing the detail frequency setting will allow the camera to sharpen finer and finer details. Decreasing it will reduce the sharpening of fine details. And you can see this in this star chart, as increasing the detail setting makes the very fine details at the very core, the center of the chart, sharper. Next is coring level. This works in effect a lot like the threshold setting that you find on most image sharpening programs. It essentially puts a threshold that limits how sharpening will be applied to fine detail, which ultimately helps stop sharpening noise. Coring level has a range of -30 to +50 with a default of 0. Increasing the coring level reduces the sharpening applied to fine details, while decreasing the coring level makes those fine details sharper. When using the in-camera sharpening, you'll want to increase the coring level to stop the camera from sharpening noise at higher ISOs, while at lower ISOs, you might find that you can reduce the coring level to allow the camera to sharpen more fine details. Now, the final setting is limit. Limit essentially puts a cap on how much over or undershoot the camera will apply to make edges appear sharper. Like detail frequency, I had a hard time seeing a big difference when I adjusted this, though there is clearly some difference, and it was most obvious as a reduction in the black and white halos that you see when extreme sharpening settings. That said, if set high enough, level can cancel the sharpening on those extreme edges entirely. So, how might you want to use the sharpening settings? Well, first of all, in my testing, sharpening appears more noticeable, or at least it might be because you can zoom in more at higher resolutions. At 1080p, where I normally shoot, the difference in sharpening is subtle at best. However, even at high resolutions, I found that sharpening didn't go overboard, at least not nearly as much as sharpening can in post or in image editors where you get really obnoxious sharpening halos. So, how might you want to set up the sharpening on your camera? And again, it's a good question, and it's something you might want to do, or what you might want to do. Comes down to, again, whether you're working in a live environment or in a post-production environment. If your work goes through post-production and color grading, then it's probably best to sharpen in post. At a minimum, you get more flexibility, easier to use algorithms and interfaces, and potentially a way more capable tool for doing the job. However, in live applications, you may want to play with the sharpening setting to find the best look for your images. Now, unfortunately, I can't make any specific recommendations on sharpening. I leave mine at the default. After sharpness, again, continuing in menu order, we come to noise reduction. As the name implies, noise reduction is the in-camera noise reduction system that's found on Canon's cinema cameras and those that use the custom picture system. I've actually done a video about noise reduction already, which I will link in the usual places, that goes into a lot more detail than I'm going to do here. However, the executive summary is this. The custom picture engine provides three options for in-camera noise reduction: automatic, spatial filter, and frame correlation. What Canon calls spatial filter is simply spatial noise reduction, and it reduces noise by slightly blurring each frame on an individual basis. Spatial filter can be set between off and 12 in 1 unit increments. Increasing the strength reduces the noise and the resulting image, but also reduces the sharpness and high frequency detail. Temporal noise reduction is what Canon calls frame correlation, and it works by averaging together a sequence of frames to remove noise. This process exploits the fact that noise will change in every frame, but the subject matter rarely moves that fast. Frame correlation can be set to use either 0, 1, 2, 3, or 3 frames, where the increased number of frames used increases how much noise is reduced, but also makes the resulting video more susceptible to having after images due to the subject motion. The final setting, although it's the first in menu order, is automatic, and when automatic is set to on, which is the default, the camera controls the noise reduction settings automatically, and the spatial filter and frame correlation settings individually are ignored. Now, unfortunately, Canon doesn't provide details on the automatic noise reduction algorithm. I presume it uses both spatial and temporal techniques, but there's no real way to be entirely clear on which or how much. It's also not clear how the camera determines how those are being adjusted. Is it just ISO? Is it ISO and frame rate? Is it ISO frame rate and detected subject motion? They don't tell us. So with that said, how should you configure and use noise reduction? Well, again, this depends on whether you're working live or with post-production. If your shooting involves post-production, it's generally preferable to err to the side of less in-camera noise reduction and apply more noise reduction in post when it's necessary. Since your computer doesn't have the same processing limitations as the camera has, you can bring much more sophisticated noise reduction techniques, including now even AI-assisted ones, to bear on your video in post, and they will produce significantly better results than what you can do with this in-camera system. On the other hand, in a live situation, you'll likely want to deal with the noise as much as possible in camera, well, to get the best results. Now, unfortunately, this is another one of those places where I can't simply say, use these settings if you're shooting at this ISO. Additionally, when talking about using frame correlation or temporal noise reduction, you need to adjust its level depending on the subject and camera motion of whatever you're shooting. Use less with fast-moving subjects or lots of camera motion. Use more when everything is very stationary. Continuing along, next we come in menu order to skin detail. Skin detail is intended to provide a way to selectively soften skin tones by targeting specific colors. However, because the softening is being done using color information and not something like subject detection, the camera will actually apply the softening effect to anything in the image that matches the colors it's targeting, even if it's not a person's skin. Additionally, the skin detail setting allows you to adjust the target color in such a way that it can actually target almost any color, not just skin tones. So while it is called skin detail, you can soften pretty much anything or any color. So that's what it does. Now let's take a look at the settings that we have available to control it. In the skin detail menu, you will find 5 options: effect level, hue, chroma, area, and Y or luminance level. Effect level controls how much softening is applied, and the choices are off, which is the default, low, medium, and high. The next 3 options, hue, chroma, and Y level, control what color in the image is actually filtered or selected or masked, or however you want to think about it. Hue controls what color is targeted. At the default setting of 0, the camera should be targeting skin tones. However, the plus or minus 16 unit range is actually large enough for the camera to target just about any color. Chroma, which I find somewhat confusingly named, controls the saturation of the color selection area. The available range is 0 to 31 with a default of 13. In my testing, increasing chroma appears to allow more saturated colors to be selected. In my testing, I found chroma to be somewhat difficult to work with. With certain gamma curves, the chroma setting was very sensitive, and decreasing it past 7 or so completely deselected everything. In other gamma curves, like BT709 standard, decreasing chroma all the way to 0 did almost nothing, and the response was very different. The next setting is area, and Canon's documentation says that area controls the range of colors detected for skin tones. Now, area in my testing has proven more difficult for me to wrap my head around. The best explanation that I have so far is that increasing it allows more colors to be included in the selection area, or the selection, but not necessarily in a specific direction. So it doesn't necessarily mean more saturated or more yellow or more red. It kind of goes everywhere in broadening the way that the colors are selected. Now, the last setting is Y or luminance level. This adjusts the brightness range that will be used by the skin tone selection level. Increasing the Y level allows lighter areas to be included in the color selection. In any event, all 4 of these adjustments have a range of 0 to 31 with a default value of 16. Additionally, when any of the adjustment settings, the camera displays a red zebra pattern over the area that is the color that will be selected, or over the area that's in the color that will be selected. Now, I should also note that the skin detail adjustment appears to take place after the conversion to YCC color and the included gamma curve application. I say this because I found it almost impossible to get skin detail to select light skin tones when I was using Canon Log 3 Gamma, but it worked much more reliably when it was set to BT709 standard. So, to make a long story short, this is again one of those settings that I'd only consider using if you're in a live situation. And even then, given the coarseness of the settings and the difficulty that I've seen in trying to get it to adjust, I wouldn't consider it all that useful. If you go through color grading, there are much better tools in post if you want to soften skin tones in virtually all NLEs. Continuing down along the menu, again, we come to color matrix tuning. To put it bluntly, color matrix transforms are an incredibly powerful way to manipulate colors in an RGB image. And while they're fairly simple to understand, at least if you have a little bit of an understanding of vector math or matrix math, I find it quite difficult to try to manipulate and explain in a simple way for a simple section in a video. Consequently, I'm not even going to attempt to explain it in detail in this video. I was going to suggest that if you were interested, leave a comment and let me know, but digging into this has turned out to be more unexpectedly interesting to me, so I will probably have a video coming on color matrix transforms and the color matrix tuning that Canon offers in a lot more depth later on that's much more technical in nature. The short of it, however, is that this is a global adjustment to the colors of your image. Now, for most of us, you can and probably should leave the color matrix settings at their default of 0. Moreover, if you're shooting with anything with the intent of post-processing, while you could almost certainly use the color matrix transformation here or adjustment here to accomplish some of the things that you would want to in post, it's almost always going to be easier to do this in your NLE, where the interface will be more intuitive and easier to use. So the short of it, don't use this. Next, we come to the Custom Picture's white balance adjustment. Fundamentally, this setting does the same thing as the camera's normal color temperature-based white balance setting. That is, they both adjust the relative levels of red, green, and blue to compensate for the different amounts of those colors that are present in different light sources. However, unlike the normal white balance setting where you pick a color temperature and a green magenta cast correction, and then the camera does all the hard math of just adjusting the individual gains, here you are adjusting the gain offsets directly for each channel. The camera exposes a range of plus or minus 50 with a default of 0. Now, this is another one of those settings that I'd say you probably don't need to mess with unless you know exactly what you're doing, and this video is not really long enough or detailed enough to put you in that category if this is the first time you've seen this. I should also note that some camera manuals say that these settings supersede the normal white balance adjustments. In my testing, that really wasn't the case. These are an adjustment that applies on top of the regular white balance, but not in place of. So these are adjustments that are fine-tuning the white balance as it already stands. Well, that brings us to the final globally applicable setting in the color custom picture system, and that is color corrections. The color corrections menu allows users to dial in specific color corrections based on targeted color areas. Not spatial areas in the image, but areas of similar color. The first option, Select Area, allows you to choose whether the camera will use area A, B, or both when making adjustments to the image. Remember, these are color areas, not spatial areas in the picture. The next 4 settings, Phase, Chroma, Area, and Level, are used to select the color range that will be affected by this setting. Incidentally, these work a lot like the same settings that we just talked about in Skin Detail. Finally, the Revision Level and Revision Phase settings are where you dial in the adjustment to the color's saturation and hue, respectively. Now again, like most of these settings, changing these is largely unnecessary, especially if your footage is going to be color graded in post. And for the most part, most users will never want to adjust these even in a live context, although I could see some instances where it might be necessary. So with that said, I'm going to wrap this one up here. I've said repeatedly in these videos that the custom picture system is designed to give professional users the control they need in any situation they might find themselves in. And you could hopefully see it now. Now, the good news here is that for the rest of us mere mortals, messing with these settings is either unnecessary, or if you're shooting live in a broadcast context where you can't do anything in post, you'll probably be told what adjustments you might need to do, if you need to do any, by a recording engineer. In any event, I still recommend that if you are shooting in a post-production environment, simply leave these all at their default, and use your NLE and its adjustments and color grading, it will be faster, easier, and more intuitive to get the same or potentially even better results. That said, I hope you found this useful or at least interesting. If you did, let me know by hitting that like button. Also, if this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Finally, if you'd like to help and support this channel, you can help us for free by liking this video, sharing it with your friends, and leaving a comment with your experiences. Likewise, you can support us by hitting that thanks button or buying yourself something you've always wanted from one of the affiliate links in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.